We're getting breaking news out of Washington tonight. President Trump says he's calling off a planned attack on Iran. Let's get into it. Late Saturday night, Trump posted this on Truth Social. He said the United States is, quote, locked and loaded and ready to go against the Islamic Republic of Iran at levels of military terror, strength, and power not seen since World War II. Strong words. But then comes the twist. He says Iran, along with other Middle Eastern countries, just asked the U.S. to hold off on any attack because the perimeters of a deal have allegedly been agreed to. And that deal, according to Trump, would include the immediate, complete, and total opening of the Strait of Hormuz and an end to Iran's nuclear threat. So for now the strikes are off, but only for now. Here's what happened. This didn't come out of nowhere. The U.S. and Iran have been locked in open conflict since February 28th, 5 months of exchanged strikes. 5 months of a ceasefire that was supposed to hold and didn't. There was an interim agreement reached back in mid-June. It bought a short window of quiet, then it collapsed within weeks, when Iran resumed attacks on shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. That strait matters more than almost any other stretch of water on Earth. A huge share of the world's oil moves through it. When ships stop moving through the strait, energy prices move instead, and they've been moving fast. Brent crude futures rose 24% in July alone. Analysts told Reuters they expect prices to climb even further before this is over. That's not a talking point. That's the global economy. Absorbing the cost of a war, most people aren't watching closely. Now here's the timeline of just the last few days. By late last week, multiple U.S. outlets were reporting that Trump was preparing for a fresh round of strikes on Iran, possibly as early as this past weekend. U.S. embassies across the Middle East issued warnings to American citizens. Be ready for flight cancellations. Be ready for travel disruption. That's not routine language. That's the kind of warning governments send out when they expect something to happen soon. Then, on Saturday, before Trump's post ever went out, two things happened almost back to back. First, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman picked up the phone and called Trump directly. According to a person familiar with that conversation, first reported by Axios, the Crown Prince raised concerns about the U.S. escalating the conflict. The specific worry, according to that source, was what happens if American strikes target Iran's energy infrastructure. Riyadh doesn't want a wider war on its doorstep. Riyadh especially doesn't want an energy war in a region built on energy exports. Second, and this is the part that didn't get nearly enough attention, Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi was working the phones too. Iran's state-run IRNA news agency reported that Araghchi held calls with senior officials in Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. The purpose, according to that reporting, was to warn against renewed U.S. military action and to signal there would be consequences if the strikes resumed. So while Washington was weighing whether to strike, Tehran was working every regional back channel it had to stop that strike from happening. Hours later, Trump posted the statement calling it off. Here's the problem. Calling something off is not the same as ending it. While all of this diplomacy was unfolding, the fighting on the ground didn't stop. On Saturday, a government facility in northern Kuwait was hit. Civilian property on Bubian Island was also struck. Kuwait's army says falling shrapnel caused material damage, but no casualties were reported. Still, that's Kuwait, a country that isn't even a direct party to this war, catching shrapnel from it anyway. At sea, the British Navy confirmed a tanker was struck, and a separate explosion hit close to another vessel in the Strait of Hormuz off the coast of Oman. The UK Maritime Trade Organization said an unidentified projectile struck the first tanker roughly 11 nautical miles northeast of a location called Lima in Omani waters, damaging its engine room. A day later, the group reported a large splash and an explosion near a second tanker, sailing about 21 nautical miles northwest of the city of Kasab. No casualties in either case. But that's two separate incidents, in 2 days, in the single most important shipping lane on the planet, while the two countries were supposedly talking about a deal to reopen it. That's documented. That's not speculation. That's UKMTO's own reporting. What nobody noticed at first is that this is not the first time Trump has pulled back from the edge like this. Back in late March, Trump extended a deadline he'd set for Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz, pushing it out to April 6th, and said he'd hold off on bombing Iran's energy plants. That extension came even as thousands of additional U.S. troops moved toward the region, even as Israel poured more forces into southern Lebanon to fight Iran-backed Hezbollah, and even as sirens sounded across Israel warning of incoming Iranian missile barrages. Then separately, Trump agreed to a 2-week ceasefire window after talks with Pakistan's prime minister and its top military commander, again tied to a demand that Iran completely and immediately reopen the strait. Do you see the pattern forming here? Threaten a strike. Set a deadline. Get a request for more time from regional players. Announce a pause tied to conditions Iran hasn't actually delivered on yet. Repeat. That's not a criticism buried in this reporting. That's simply what the record shows, laid out chronologically, from multiple independent outlets covering the same events. Here's where things changed this time, though. This latest post wasn't framed as a deadline extension. It was framed as cancellation, tied to what Trump called the perimeters of a deal. Notice the wording carefully. Not a signed deal, not a finalized deal, the perimeters of one, the outline, the shape of an agreement that, as of this posting, has not been confirmed by the other side. In his statement, Trump wrote, quote, "Based on this request, I have agreed, for the future benefit of the world and likewise the survival of a successful and prosperous Iran, to cancel the attack, subject to being able to rapidly make a deal." He added that Israel is joining the U.S. in that same commitment. Two words carry the entire post, subject to. That phrase means the pause has a condition attached. It's not unconditional. It's not permanent. If the deal doesn't materialize, and materialize fast, that attack is still on the table. Now here's the counter-argument. Iran isn't exactly rushing to confirm any of this. Iran's Fars news agency, which is state-run, described Trump's demands as, in their words, a wish list. That's a dismissive characterization. It's not the language of a country that believes a deal is close. As of this reporting, Iran has not officially confirmed the terms Trump laid out, including the claim that its nuclear program would be shut down entirely. Iran has consistently said its nuclear program exists for peaceful purposes only. That's their stated position. It has not changed with this announcement. Meanwhile, Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, posted his own statement on X on Saturday. He didn't mention Trump's announcement directly. Instead, he wrote about, quote, "the wars, pressure, and relentless hostilities inflicted on the Iranian people," and said the future of Iran will be shaped by Iranians themselves. That's a message aimed at a domestic audience. It reads like a leader preparing his own public for more hardship, not one celebrating a breakthrough. So you have two governments describing the exact same moment in almost opposite tones. One side calling it a deal on the verge of closing, the other side calling it a wish list and a hostility to be endured. That gap matters. Deals don't get finalized when the two parties can't even agree on whether there's a deal to describe. Let's talk about why this war started and why the stakes are so high 5 months in. The conflict traces back to February 28th, when U.S. and Israeli forces launched strikes on Iran. Trump has argued publicly that keeping Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons justifies the economic pain the war has caused, including those rising fuel costs hitting consumers worldwide. That's the stated justification. Whether it holds up depends entirely on what Iran's nuclear program actually contained and how close it actually was to weapons capability, questions that remain unresolved in public reporting. What's not in dispute is the economic pressure building on Trump specifically. Oil prices don't rise 24% in a single month without consequences. Consumers feel it at the pump, markets feel it in volatility, and presidents feel it in approval ratings. A rapidly escalating war with no end date and climbing energy prices with no ceiling creates exactly the kind of political pressure that makes "cancel the attack, subject to a deal" a very convenient headline to put out on a Saturday night. That doesn't mean the pause isn't genuine. It means the pause is happening inside a pressure cooker, and pressure cookers tend to explain a lot about timing. Here's the real-world consequence playing out right now, tonight, regardless of what the final deal says. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz remains deterred. It has been deterred since the war began, according to reporting on the shipping disruption, because insurers and shipping companies don't send tankers into a war zone regardless of what a social media post says. Reopening the strait immediately and completely, as Trump's post demands, requires more than a ceasefire. It requires the kind of sustained calm that gets tankers and the companies that insure them comfortable again. That doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen because of one truth social post, no matter how forceful the language. And that's before you factor in what's still happening on the ground independent of any Washington statement. Kuwait, a country not directly fighting this war, still took hits this weekend. 2 tankers were struck in 2 days in the strait itself. None of that stopped because of a pause announced from the White House. The pause applies to a future U.S. attack. It does not appear to apply to the fighting that's already underway between other parties in the region. So what happens next? The deal Trump described requires 2 very specific things from Iran: immediate and total opening of the Strait of Hormuz, and a complete end to what Trump calls Iran's nuclear threat. Those are enormous asks. Reopening a strait that's been a war zone for months isn't a switch you flip. Ending a nuclear program isn't something Iran has agreed to in public at any point in this reporting, which means the next few days matter enormously. If Iran issues any kind of formal confirmation, expect markets to react immediately and expect oil prices to start correcting downward. If Iran stays silent, or Fars News keeps describing this as a one-sided wish list, expect this pause to look a lot like the March deadline extension and the 2-week ceasefire that came before it. Temporary, conditional, and potentially very short-lived. Watch 3 things closely. Watch whether Tehran issues any official statement confirming the terms Trump described. Watch whether the Strait of Hormuz sees a genuine drop in incidents over the coming days, not just a pause in U.S. action, but a broader de-escalation. And watch oil prices. They will tell you, faster than any government statement, whether markets believe this deal is real. For now, the attack is off. The war is not. And the difference between those two things is exactly where this story picks up next. That's where we are tonight. We'll be tracking every statement out of Washington, Tehran, and Jerusalem as this develops, and we'll bring you the confirmation the moment either side puts it on the record.